Angela Morris had always lived a life of quiet sacrifice. As a nurse at Brooklyn General Hospital, she spent her days and nights tending to the sick, holding the hands of the dying, and whispering words of comfort to strangers when their own families weren't there. At just 26, her life revolved around her work. Her modest apartment, shared with her younger sister Mia, was filled with medical textbooks, secondhand furniture, and the lingering scent of hospital disinfectant that clung to her clothes. No matter how many times she washed them, her colleagues often teased her, saying she needed to live a little, to do something wild, something reckless, anything that reminded her she was more than a nurse with tired eyes and a giving heart. Angela always laughed it off. She didn't have time for wild. Bills had to be paid, Mia's college tuition loomed, and life demanded responsibility. That Friday evening, however, fate decided to play a trick. After finishing an exhausting double shift, Angela received a text from a fellow nurse friend, Carla, inviting her on a quick weekend retreat in Miami. "Come on, Angie," Carla had begged. "You need this. Sun cocktails, no patients crying for morphine at 3 a.m. Too tired to argue and desperate for a change, said yes. Carla sent her the flight details, and Angela, without much thought, called a cab and headed to the private terminal. Mentioned in the message, when she arrived, she was immediately overwhelmed. Unlike the noisy chaos of JFK or LaGuardia, this private airport was serene, almost intimidatingly quiet. Luxury cars lined the parking areas, sleek black SUVs and glistening sports cars she had only ever seen in magazines. Angela, in her simple jeans, sneakers, and a faded hoodie, felt out of place. She clutched her small overnight bag tighter. At the check-in counter, she gave her name. The attendant glanced at her list, smiled politely, and nodded. "Right this way, Miss Morris." Angela blinked. Everything seemed too smooth, too easy. But exhaustion had dulled her suspicion. She followed the attendant across the tarmac until her eyes landed on a TAA's private jet. Larger than any plane she had ever seen up close, gleaming white under the runway lights. The stairs were down. A flight attendant stood ready to welcome her aboard and inside. Inside was another world. The interior stole her breath. Cream leather seats arranged like a living room. Mahogany paneling polished to a shine, golden fixtures that sparkled under the ambient lights, and a faint aroma of roses and expensive cologne that hung in the air. She thought her knees might give out. This can't be for me," she whispered, but the flight attendant ushered her in warmly. Angela sat down hesitantly, her hands trembling. Maybe Carla's retreat really had been organized by some wealthy donor? Or perhaps she was too tired to process what was happening. She set her bag down and rubbed her face, trying to fight the sleep tugging at her eyelids. Moments later, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from behind. Angela turned. Dan froze. A man entered, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored navy suit that hugged his frame perfectly. His presence filled the cabin instantly, commanding, magnetic. His hair was dark and perfectly styled, his jaw sharp, his eyes the color of storm clouds. He carried the kind of aura that screamed wealth, power, and danger. Angela's heart skipped a beat. He stopped in his tracks when he saw her sitting there. "Who are you?" His voice was deep, accented slightly, the kind of tone that could silence a room. Angela swallowed hard, her mouth dry. I'm Angela Morris." I was told this was my flight to Miami." The man raised a brow, glancing at the flight attendant, who looked just as confused. Then, suddenly, his lips curved into something between amusement and intrigue. "This isn't a flight to Miami," he said slowly, his gaze locked on her. "This is my private jet. We're flying to Paris." Angela felt her stomach drop. Pulse thundered in her ears. She had boarded the wrong plane. She was sitting in a billionaire's jet, and now she was trapped. The man extended a hand toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm Alexander Drake," he said simply, as though the name should mean something to her. And perhaps it did, because in that moment, Angela knew her. Life was no longer ordinary. This was a mistake that would change everything. Angela's mind spun like a carousel. Paris? Billionaire? Mistake? It was too much to process. She stood abruptly, her bag clutched in her hand, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. This is all a huge misunderstanding. I must get off this plane before it takes off. But the engines were already humming, the cabin lights dimming as the flight attendants prepared for takeoff. Alexander Drake, however, looked entirely unbothered. He leaned against the leather seat with the calm confidence of a man who controlled everything. Around him, "Sit down, Miss Morris," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The runway clearance has been given. You're not going anywhere, at least not until Paris." Angela's mouth fell open. "But I can't just go to Paris. I'm a nurse. I have shifts, responsibilities." My sister Alexander's lips curved slightly, his expression one of quiet amusement. "Then consider this. An unexpected vacation. Courtesy of your mistake." His nonchalance infuriated her. He was a billionaire, clearly used to bending the world to his will. But she wasn't part of his world. Endless nights to make ends meet. She didn't belong here. The jet lifted smoothly into the sky. Angela gripped the armrest so hard her knuckles turned white. She hated flying. Every bump made her stomach twist. She closed her eyes, whispering a prayer. Then, a voice broke through her fear. "You're afraid of flying," Alexander observed. Angela opened her eyes to find him watching her intently, his storm gray eyes unreadable. "No, yes, well, I just don't do it often." Without a word, he reached across the aisle and placed his hand gently over hers. The warmth of his touch startled her, but it was oddly grounding. Her heartbeat steadied. "There," he said softly. "Better." Angela pulled her hand back quickly, cheeks burning. "I don't need comfort from a stranger." Alexander chuckled, a low, velvety sound that made her insides flutter against her will. "Stranger, you've already boarded my jet, Miss Morris. You're closer to me now than most people ever get." Angela turned her face toward the window, hiding the blush creeping up her neck. She refused to let herself be charmed by this arrogant man. Hours passed, but exhaustion eventually won. She fell asleep, curled up in her seat. When she awoke, a blanket covered her shoulders, tucked gently around her. She blinked in confusion. She hadn't brought one. Her eyes drifted to Alexander, seated across from her, reading quietly with a glass of red wine in hand. Had he covered her? The thought unsettled her. As the pilot announced their descent into Paris, Angela's stomach twisted with both dread and anticipation. She shouldn't be here, yet part of her couldn't deny a strange spark inside her: fear, excitement, maybe even curiosity about this mysterious billionaire. When the jet landed smoothly and the doors opened, Paris greeted her with its crisp evening air and glittering city lights in the distance. Angela clutched her bag tightly, determined to leave immediately, to find the first commercial flight back to New York. But Alexander had other plans, Miss Morrissey said smoothly, as they descended the stairs. A sleek, black limousine waited at the bottom. "You've come this far. It would be a shame to leave without at least seeing Paris." Angela stared at him, torn between running and staying. And in that hesitation, her life shifted again. Asterisk. Angela told herself it would be only for one night. She would explore Paris, eat a croissant, take a photo under the Eiffel Tower, and then find her way back home. But Paris had other plans. The limousine whisked them through cobbled streets, past cafes glowing with warm golden lights, couples laughing over glasses of wine, artists painting by the Seine. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts and fresh bread. Angela's heart ached. She had dreamed of this city all her life, but never imagined she would see it like this. Alexander watched her with quiet satisfaction. "You've never been here before," he said. It wasn't a question. Angela shook, her head, her eyes glued to the sparkling Eiffel Tower in the distance. "I've never been anywhere outside America. My life doesn't exactly allow vacations." His gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. "Then let Paris be your first gift." They arrived at the Hotel Plaza Athene, its facade dripping with red awnings and glittering chandeliers visible through the grand windows. Angela nearly refused to enter. The doorman, the luxury, the sheer opulence, it was overwhelming. But Alexander simply extended a hand. "Trust me." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. Inside, the hotel was breathtaking golden light, marble floors, and crystal chandeliers that glittered like stars. Angela's room overlooked the Eiffel Tower itself, its lights twinkling like diamonds. Against the night sky, tears pricked her eyes. This is too much. I don't belong here. Alexander stepped closer, his voice low. You belong wherever you choose to be, Angela. Don't let anyone, not even yourself, tell you otherwise. Something in his tone pierced her. For the first time, she wondered if there was more to him than the arrogant billionaire Fafade. The next day, Alexander insisted on showing her Paris. They strolled along the Seine, visited the Louvre, and ate fresh macarons in a tiny bakery tucked away on a side street. Angela laughed more in one day than she had in years. At lunch in a quiet cafe, she finally asked, "Why are you doing this?" "You don't even know me." Alexander looked at her for a long moment before answering. "'Cause I see someone who deserves more than exhaustion and sacrifice. 'Cause I haven't seen someone look at this city with such wonder in a long time." Angela's cheeks warmed. She wasn't used to being noticed. Not like this. But just as she began to let herself enjoy the fantasy, reality crept back in. She couldn't forget her sister, her patience, her life back home. She couldn't stay here, no matter how magical Paris seemed. That night, as they stood beneath the Eiffel Tower, its golden lights bathing them both, Alexander leaned in slightly, his eyes dark and unreadable. Angela's breath caught. Was he about to kiss her? Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and longing. Asterisk, the kiss didn't happen, not yet. Angela pulled back at the last moment, her heart hammering. "I can't," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Alexander studied her, his expression unreadable. "Why not?" "Because this isn't real. You're a billionaire. I'm just me, a nurse who can barely afford rent. This is some fairy tale and I don't belong in it." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Alexander spoke, his tone softer than she had ever heard. "Do you think wealth makes me more deserving of happiness than you? Do you think money shields me from loneliness?" Angela blinked. She hadn't expected vulnerability from him. "My life," he continued, "is filled with people who want something from me. Investors, partners, politicians. You didn't even know who I was when you boarded my jet. You looked at me like I was just a man. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Angela's throat tightened. She had assumed his life was perfect, lavish, untouchable. But beneath the surface, there was a man craving authenticity, someone who longed to be seen. Over the next few days, they grew closer. They explored Montmartre, wandered through art galleries, and shared quiet moments. In hidden gardens, Angela told him stories about her patients, about Mia, about her dreams of one day opening a small clinic for underprivileged families. Alexander listened intently, never once dismissing her dreams. One evening, after dinner on a terrace overlooking the city, Alexander finally asked, "Angela, if you could stay just for a little while longer, would you?" Her heart twisted. She wanted to. God, she wanted to. But reality loomed. Her patients needed her. Mia needed her. And what if this was just a fleeting fantasy for him, soon to be forgotten once the jet engines roared again? "Can't," she whispered. But even as she said it, her heart ached with doubt. Asterisk, the morning of her departure arrived too soon. Alexander had arranged a flight back to New York for her. Angela packed her small bag slowly. Every part of her wishing she could freeze time. When she stepped out of her room, Alexander was waiting in the lobby. He looked as composed as ever, but his eyes betrayed something else. Something almost like sadness. "You don't have to go," he said quietly. Angela forced a smile. "Yes, I do. My life is back there. This was beautiful, but it isn't mine." They drove to the airport in silence. At the jet, Alexander took her hand, holding it firmly. "Angela, I don't care about the differences between us. I don't care where you come from. All I know is, when you're near, the world feels lighter. Stay." Tears welled in her eyes. For once, she wasn't just a nurse or a caretaker or a woman defined by responsibilities. For once she was. Someone worth fighting for. Angela's heart pounded as she made her choice. She dropped her bag onto the tarmac and whispered, "Then take me back to Paris." A slow smile spread across Alexander's face as he pulled her into his arms. This time, the kiss happened, soft, deep, filled with the promise of something neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. The city of lights awaited them once more, not as strangers thrown together by mistake, but as two souls daring to rewrite their destinies. Angela Morris, the simple nurse, had boarded the wrong jet and found herself exactly where she was meant to be.